Hey, what's up? Welcome to another episode of What's Up Conversations, a podcast with icons and legends of the video game industry. My today's guest is a legendary artist and art director. To mention some of his work, I can name Halo Infinite, Halo 5, Halo 4, Rage, Assassin's Creed, and many more. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Nicolas Bouvier, aka Sparth. In this episode, Emma Domery and I talked to Nicolas about his career, success story, his early gigs, art direction, and the way he creates art based on observation and understanding of his surroundings. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends if you're enjoying this content. You can learn more about What's Up Conversations on nicofarmusic.com. What's Up Conversations is on YouTube, video, and all the major podcast streaming services. Thank you for tuning in. Let's do it. Hello and welcome to What's Up Conversations, Nicolas. Congratulations on the release of the second season of Halo Infinite. It was my favorite game of the year last year. As a Halo fan, I really love the new approach you guys have taken for this new entry in the franchise. Thank you so much. You're one of the most inspiring and innovative artists in the industry. Tell us about your childhood, your early days of becoming interested in your craft and the first gigs. Tell us about your success story and if the path you took is exactly what you intended from the beginning.
I think I come from a background where, art was always around, but at the same time, I come from a pretty scientific family in a way. So it was, I still needed to just like prove myself when it comes to finding a way to just make art and just make a living out of it. But I think that as soon as I was 5 or 6 years old, I think the only thing that really interested me was just like drawing, I remember that according to the family legend, my parents were collecting these little stories that I could do, and I remember that detail with pigs and birds. Don't ask me why. There were pigs and birds, and they were interacting, and I was just like literally drawing the scene and putting, in a bit like an illustrated book. I would just like write down what was happening underneath in a very straightforward way, but just like having a bit of that storytelling at 5 was probably something that my parents were like wanting to develop, and they were saying, this is great, I guess, But as a result, I think I really had that in my blood, which is expressing myself through visuals. That does not mean that it was like all roses and all perfect, though. What I mean is that my childhood was just really pretty much on the dreamy side and just not really very socially connected, So as a result, I think that I was even more into my own inner world when it comes to finding ways to express myself through art and through a lot of imaginary ideas that would just make me be very distant from other kids, even like friends, and it's just like I'm here, but I'm not here. I've never been diagnosed with autism, but I bet I would fall straight into the spectrum, like really, or ADD also, like a very, very connected to like a very focused mind, and at the same time, sometimes too disconnected from the outside. So it just gives the impression that I don't care, but I do care. It's just that I'm just very often too much in my mind to be really there in the moment. See what I mean? But I was, I was born in France, in the southwest of France back in 1971, and when I was like 9 or 10. We moved to Paris. It was in the southwest, so I was born in the city of Tarbes. It's close to the French Pyrenees, close to the Spanish frontier. And I had a regular childhood, but again, very not. I was just not in my nest or anything, but I was nonetheless a pretty distant kid, very distant child. So as a result, after like maybe when I was just like 9, we moved to Paris. We just stayed in Paris for about 2-3 years. And I remember that my dad comes back home one day and says, kids, we are going to go live in Africa. We're going to go live in the Ivory Coast. And we looked at him like, oh my gosh, this is the best trip ever. We're going to be with kids that are going to be very different. We're going to learn a lot from them. And we already had all these plans in mind. The problem is that it actually just did not happen. Like, we had that for like 2-3 months. And
Wow.
after a while, it just did not happen. But what happened is that we went somewhere else. Back in around 1981, after 3 years in Paris, the whole family moved to Singapore. And so we lived in Singapore for maybe 2-3 years, maybe close to 3 years. And yeah, very distant. I mean, very distant country compared to France, and a very European setting. We discovered Asia, Southeast Asia, in a way that was amazing. In a bit like expatriate people, so we had we had it easy going in a way, and it was fun, very different. I remember having a bit of that homesickness because it was just so far away from France. But at the same time, I really loved it because you had a lot of details that you probably gather in your mind as a kid. For example, um, Singapore is some central parts of Singapore where you had actually still a lot of jungle. And that wasn't back in 1981, 1982. And I remember that the French school was in one of these places. I forgot the names, but as a result, it was not unusual to actually have snakes just go by in front of the school classes. And imagine, like, as a European kid, just literally like going to Singapore and literally even knowing that there was a bit of a danger because there were cobra snakes that were like sometimes just like creeping in. It was, all these things that were just like very phenomenal for a kid's mind. Um, we stayed there for about 3.5 or 4 years. But the problem is, I was not only a very dreamy kid, but I was a pretty amazing slacker. I was not doing much in the French school, and very often I was just like, living the good life. And there was a swimming pool, so we would be in the pool doing absolutely nothing. So my parents just started to just get worried about the whole thing, and just at one point told me, we are going to send you to your uncle and your aunt's house in Florida. So that's how I actually discovered the US for the first time. It was back around probably like 1984. And from 84 to 85, I actually spent a bit more than a year in Florida. And my uncle was an American soldier that actually was on a boat in the south of France. My aunt, in the end of the 50s, she's French. She found that American GI or something, and she just went back to the US with him. And that's how it just went, as a result. And they stayed, together until my uncle passed. And I really valued him a lot. He was just, he was a bit my American dad, if I might say. He was a very down to earth, very concrete person that was pretty amazing in many ways. And as a result, so I lived at their house for about a year. And and I'm going to say that right now because you will see a link with why I love spaceships too, why I'm doing a lot of science fiction, is that when I was living in Florida at their place with my cousins, we were living in Cocoa Beach. Cocoa Beach is like literally like 6-7 miles away from from Cape Canaveral and from the Space Center. And in 1984 is the golden age of the space shuttle. It's really where you had like 4, 5, 6, shuttles taking off during a full year. It was like golden era of American space in the full discovery process. And I remember as a kid in the school, we would just get out of the classes to see some of these launches, get out of the class and like literally see that outside. It was just phenomenal, as you may guess, especially in 1984, where the full space program was in just like full gear. And so as a result, I just really enjoyed all that, and it's like that amount of memories and cultural details that I just gathered in my brain again. After about a year and a half, I just like went back to Singapore. I lived another year there, and around 87 or so, I actually went back to France to start working to just like finish what we call the 2-3 years before the baccalaureate. And so that was up until 1989. So I stayed in France for all these years, from 88 approximately. I forgot the exact years, but 88 to 2003 actually. So I did like a full years of studies at the Art Deco School in Paris. Um, it was like a pretty extended period living in France. But around 2003, after having been in the industry for already quite a few years, I just grew a bit tired of just like the same routine in Paris. And Paris is an interesting city. I personally, I'm not a huge fan of Paris. When you live there, it's very different than when you're outside of it. People outside, especially seen from America, Paris is just the city of light. It's marvelous, right? Well, when you live there, it's all about um, the subway stinks. Everything is just like dirty, and it's just not like the ideal place that people believe it is. So after a few years living in Paris, I was just kind of growing tired of it, and I just decided to just leave myself with my family, my wife, and my kids. And in a way, it often happens this way when you are expatriates with as a child. Very often, or it's not rare that you would do the same with your own family and kids, and you would just leave also. It's a very interesting process where when you are exposed to new cultures, you tend to want to find that again. But it gives the downside of it is that it gives a bit of that fear where you are feeling good nowhere, like everywhere and nowhere at the same time. In a very grass is greener type of way. You always try to find the next adventure, the next gig, and it's not always easy. But that's another subject. It's about what is expatriation, what it is to just be homesick, what it is to just like living away from where you were born. It's a very complicated subject. But to go back to a bit of my the timeline of everything I've been doing. 2003, end of 2003, I leave France, go to Ubisoft. I remember I had my friend Pascal Blanchet on either email or the phone, and I was like, "Hey Pascal, I just really want to leave France, and I want to. Is Ubisoft in Montreal? Would they want to just like hire me and start working on something?" And pretty fast, I had a producer call me back and say, "Hey, do you want to just like come by? We could do a full interview and all that stuff." And after like a few months, I was literally in Montreal working on Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, super early 2004, I think. Worked on Prince of Persia for about a year, and then after that, we jumped straight to Assassin's Creed, the very first concept of Assassin's Creed, and it was probably uh, end of 2004, beginning of 2005. So, it was, I had a bit of a great run into quite a few countries between Singapore, between the US, Florida at that time. And I have to say, between 1987 and 1991, my parents actually were living between Paris and Beijing in China. So my dad was living in China full time, and my mom would just go back and forth between Beijing and Paris for about 4 or 5 years. The reason for this is that us as students, we were like, 17, 18. It was not easy to actually live in China at that time and being able to have a full study cursus and all that stuff. So we still were living in Paris, but my dad and my mom was going back and forth, and my dad was working full time in Beijing. So we did that for about 4 or 5 years, but I had the opportunity to go to China several times as a result and visit China and have a bit of the immersion of what China was when it comes to Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, even the south of China. So it was really great. So as a result, again, I had the luck and the opportunities to be able to travel quite a lot. And I think it's the key the key point I want to be saying is the more you travel, the more you just like literally go, like gather things that will go into your visual library and that will allow you to be a better artist. I think that some of the strongest artists are the ones very often that have being able to travel. So it is not obviously mandatory. Some people are not having the option to travel. They're not able to. It is financially complicated. It's just like it's expensive. So I'm not saying that it's like a condition to be a better artist. I'm saying that it can just greatly improve how you see the world. But there's a lot of artists that are unable to travel, and they're going to be like amazing too. So there's just no golden rule. But it's true that the people that cannot travel, it's really great when they still can be having different social opportunities, still being able to just like visit and travel within their hometown. There's a lot of things to probably see around us at literally 5 miles around, but we have no ideas it exists. From a crazy forest to a very specific event to like specific buildings. So what I mean is that the surprising things are all around us, and they're pretty much hidden, but we need to find them.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned going out because I was talking to Rafael Lacoste, your collaborator on Assassin's Creed, and he said the exact same thing. He said that it might be expensive to go around the world, but it's not that expensive to just go out and see your park or things around you, and it really helps. And he said that he's going to forest sometimes to get inspiration. And exactly, this is something that I understood about your journey, that you've been living all around the world and experiencing new cultures, and this is something that you're very good at, word building. And I mean, the word you're creating are just amazing, and
Thank you.
it's very imaginative, and yet I can totally relate to them and see myself living there. What makes an imaginary word alive, believable, in your opinion? What makes it full of curiosity and knowing that there is a culture there, even though there might be alien and completely made up?
No, definitely. I think that
Yeah.
Experiments and experiences abroad is again pretty fascinating. My sister-in-law and her husband, actually, a few years ago, what they did, they had 4 kids at the time. Now they have 5 kids. But when they had 4 kids, I think it was probably like more than a decade ago. They just like found that bus, and it was an old bus from the 1980s. They renovated the bus. They actually literally made a house out of the bus, and then they actually cargoed the bus to Singapore. And from Singapore, they went back to Europe by just like literally going by land, like going literally from Malaysia, so Singapore to Malaysia, Malaysia to Thailand, Thailand to maybe Vietnam, and then actually trying to just make sure that it would have all the countries going west. And it was a crazy journey. Like sometimes
that's a lot of driving. Yeah.
Sorry,
That's a lot of driving, right?
Yeah.
oh my god! Yeah. And that
Also become a good driver.
Yeah, and a lot of technical issues to make that bus work. Her husband said, "I would never do that again with a bus like that. I would get a new bus." Sometimes they were stuck for like about a week because he had to drive 15 miles with like literally just like 15 miles to just find a specific piece for the bus, go back to the bus, repair the whole thing. It was a nightmare, but they had a great experience, and now they have that in their heads. It's who they are, It's crazy stuff. So I don't think we need to be that insane, but there's a lot of ways, again, like Raphael was saying. There's a lot of ways and options to look around and see the world around us as with a very special prism, in a very specific way of seeing things. And we have a specific way of seeing things, and there's always other ways of seeing the same things. It's like a bit of a mindset that we need to just like switch to just see things differently. Let me give you an example. When I look at cars outside, every time I see like any car, I always try to see that car into a different angle. I just wonder when the car was just built. I'm just wondering if that car is going to be here in 15 years. I have 15 questions on a single car that I would see from a design standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint. What would I do to just like make it better? And I would just do that and pick myself on all these ideas that are design oriented or aesthetically oriented, on a lot of assets and props and objects around me. It's like pinging yourself on the design of the world,
Yeah.
and it's super cool stuff, and it's just becoming a habit,
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something that happens to a lot of artists. When I started doing 3D, and after that, right now, when I see an animation or a Pixar movie or Disney, I'm just like, every frame that I see, I'm just like, how the hell did they even make that? How is that even possible? Or when I see a texture or I see a wall in this, and I'm like, how can I, rebuild that in 3D? So I think, and I think it's the same for Hamid here, right? I mean, when you hear something, you're like, okay, what's the process behind it? How can I make it? How can I make it even better?
I think that what you described, Emma, I need to pronounce your name correctly, Emma Dameri.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think like what you describe is something that is pretty vital. It's the way we just keep our mind being very curious at the details of the worlds and how the world works. Not specifically from maybe a technical standpoint, even though it's a plus, but just like understanding that our brain needs to actually be surprised by what's going on around us. And there's a way to always be curious. Maybe the best artists are the ones that are actually still having a curious spirit, that and a spirit of discovery, which is not always easy. Sometimes we're all just like so taken into our own minds. But I know that one of my negatives and something I want to improve on is, for example, having more empathy towards like everything around me. Because sometimes I've been so introverted that introversion is good for creativity, but not too much, because creativity is like everything else. It's also very connected to how much you receive from the world, and if you receive, you need to give back. So basically, it's an interaction with what's around us, and that interaction works when we have more empathy and more understanding of the world. That being said, again, when we are just so focused on projects, on ideas, we just go into a mode of introversion that is just not always allowing you to share your thoughts or to just like be very connected to the world. So and there's up and downs. At times, it's good to be very immersive, and sometimes it's just good to open the door to new discoveries and being able to like see what's outside, whether it be traveling, but it can also just be social contacts. See what I mean? It's interesting because so often, if I go online and I just like chat with a friend, that friend is going to send me a link to an artist, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I start to interact with that friend and say, that artist is amazing. Look at that specific image. I send it back to him. That simple act of visual and stimulate the mind to have me being able to just like create more. So when you look at creativity, it is fueled by human interaction and the principle of discovery. It's really something that is in us, and we can emphasize and improve our art specifically by really emphasizing and improving these interactions. I really I'm a strong proponent of that, being able to just like find ways to like discuss more. The more you discuss, the more you interact with your friends and with the knowledge of your friends, and the better artist you're gonna have, you're going to be. That's a sure fact.
Exactly, and your art is a representative of your environment, of the interaction that you have in your life. So, speaking of Halo, Halo is a well-known franchise that everything about it is everything about its universe is unique and memorable. How was it entering into this franchise with fresh eyes, and then as a leader of its art department?
So, disclaimer first. As you know, I'm always relatively discreet when it comes to Halo. There's a lot I can say, but there's a lot I will never say or talk about, obviously, because we have, Brian Gerard, John, and these guys. They are the storefront of the community when it comes to the interaction. And it's true that we have very polarized fans. So as a result, I'm always trying to just be there when it comes to my own career, or finding a way to just chat about my own experience when it comes to Halo. But when it comes to the game itself, when it comes to what we've done, there's a lot of things that I will just keep quiet, because there's experts that will be able to express why we do what we do, and the way we just do it. The short fact is, it's been very difficult right now. As you know, in the tech industry, there's been quite some attrition. There's a lot of people that are moving around. A lot of people are actually just asking themselves questions when it comes to where they want to be. The pandemic has been really emphasizing these big, very philosophical questions as to what we want to be doing with the rest of our lives, basically. And as a result, there's been a very a very high mobility when it comes to people moving around from studios to studios. Some people get out of the industry, some people come in, some people come from the movie industry. What I mean is that very insane mobility has not been providing us with enough stability to create exactly what we want. It's always been a challenge, and it's a challenge throughout the video game industry right now, because of the fact that very high mobility is just not securing enough consistency to just have us being able to produce all the content we want on the long term. So it's all these things that are just coming into play. That is always it's always a bit of a challenge and complicated. Now, how did I just popped up into the Halo world is interesting. First of all, to just go back a bit, I was working at id Software in Texas, and after a few years working at id, and I was the concept artist for Rage, and Rage was out in 2011. I had a great time, but I left prior to the release. I left around 2008, and I was just really a bit tired of just living in Texas. I wanted to find something else, and I was going to go back to France, maybe to work at Ubisoft for a while, but my Kenneth Scott, my ex-boss at id, was already working at Microsoft and wanted to just see if I was interested to just work with them. And what happened is that in 2007, 2008, there was a new studio within Microsoft that was there to be able to just take care of the Halo franchise on the long term, and it just became 343 Industries after actually Bungie gained their independence back and just went out of Microsoft to just be an independent studio. So as a result, I just came in. We were probably 30. There were already 30, maybe 25, 30 people from engineers and the founders. And as a result, I just came in and I just started straight away on Halo. And we worked on the first Halo game. And interestingly, what we need to remember is that the original mandate of the studio was to just find our own vibe, find our own way of doing things. And it was complicated because I don't think there were really a lot of talks about legacy and about having actually a very legacy-oriented Halo. It was what's going to be, what is the next Halo going to look like? It was very much connected to a new way of seeing things. And the mandate was that. It was just not saying, you're going to have to really respect everything that happened in Halo from the Bungie era and just take over and all that stuff. The questions and the mandate was very different at that time. It was finding a new vibe, and creating a new studio with very different ideas, because we wanted the franchise to evolve. So seen from the outside, people don't always get why a franchise needs to evolve to that extent. But sometimes, a franchise is like a huge boat. It's just not a tiny motorboat that can allow you to do circles. It's a big boat that will just need 5 minutes to be able to just go from south to southwest. See what I mean? So as a result, that big boat is just not easy to move. It's a big entity. It's a lot of people, especially when it comes to AAA titles that are, titles that are actually very ambitious from a content and from a structure perspective. It's actually a lot of things. We want to be packing a punch, and AAA is a very specific, very interconnected process with a lot of ICs, with a lot of intervening people that need to all work together for like a single big entity. It's not easy. It's actually a very complicated way of just doing things because we're so many. There's a lot of voices. So the hierarchy, the understanding and the structure from a producing standpoint needs to just make sense. And there's a lot of hit or misses all the time when it comes to AAA, specifically because of that. Because no matter what we do, we reinvent the wheel a lot when it comes to gaming. Video games is a lot about reinventing the wheel again and again. Why? Because technology evolves all the time. And as a result, the wheel of 1995 is not the wheel of 2005, which is not the wheel from 2015. It's a different wheel because it's a different engine, because there are different tools, different workflows. So we permanently reinvent things. The movie industry is just having a bit more of that timelessness, specifically because you just like create imagery. Now there's a lot of things where filming is done differently. The matte painting is just like process is very different from 1980s, where everything just went CG with good and bad, aspects of it. But what I mean is that even more indexed on technology, that's what the video game industry is. We are indexed on technology. We are very and intricately connected to the consoles and the platforms that are going to be the release on which the game is going to be released. So it's always been a bit of a challenge. Now to go back to Halo, again, it's been 13 years for me now, which is like a pretty extended period between Halo 4, Halo 5, and Halo Infinite. It's been amazing. But again, why are these projects so different? It's because each Halo is the product of their people that were here at a specific time. A franchise is an evolving, organic process and adventure. There's just no way you can just like literally express like a perfect scientific consistency out of such a franchise when you are literally having between 500 and 700 people in a building. You just remove 40 people and you're going to have a different project. You add 40 people different people, you're going to have, it's just going to change. A franchise is the product of each intervening contributor. That's what it is. And that's how we need to see it too. So it's true. Some people are always just like either angry or frustrated because Halo 4 is not Halo. Halo 5 is not Halo. Halo Infinite is just more connected to legacy, all that stuff. I've heard everything, everything. This is why I don't always intervene, because I want to be at peace with everybody. This is a video game. It's very important to people, and I fully get it. At the same time, we need to just like be at peace with that. A franchise is a very difficult exercise, and we will never be able to please everybody. It's just never going to happen. When Halo 4 was out, people were like, it doesn't look like Halo, and at the same time, there were people who say, oh my gosh, but the single player adventure is just amazing, and it resonates with me, all that stuff. So it's so organic. It's just that's how it goes,
Yeah, it's a very hard, must be a very hard job for you. So
it's
yeah, I mean, when a franchise it's 20 years old, I mean, it just gets harder, The more you go, I mean, in 20 years, almost 20 years of Halo. So yeah.
So as an art director, it must be exactly really stressful. So I've asked this from many different people, and they all have their own perspective about the job. What do you think is the best characteristic of an art director? If someone is dreaming of becoming a Halo art director someday, 20 years from now, one day, what advice do you have for them?
I think that art direction is just not an end. and at the same time, it's let's put it this way. I think that the step of becoming an art director, it is just for me, and I think it should be the conclusion of quite a few years doing something else. What I mean by this is that I believe that the strong art directors are probably the people that have a lot of different hats at one point in their careers. Um, like going into the industry at 20 years old and telling yourself, I want to be an art director right now, it's just not going to make sense. What would make sense is say, I'm going to try to be very good at CG making, modeling. I'm going to try to be an expert somewhere. I'm going to be a great concept artist. I'm going to be putting myself to the service of a project. This makes a lot of sense. But art direction is an accomplishment that just comes with years and years of understanding what a franchise is, a project is, working with people. To really describe the way I see things, I think there's just two keywords that are always coming back when it comes to describing my job and my daily interaction and creativity when it comes to what I do. The first word is diplomacy. And the second one is obviously talent. But to go back to the first word, diplomacy has to do with the way you insert yourself into a team and how you can actually get and receive, which is get feedback, but also leverage your teammates or your colleagues into a specific group of people that are creative. And that interaction means that there should never be any toxicity. There should always be an understanding. So you can talk, but you let people talk too. Diplomacy is just the embodiment of that. It's actually a super important keyword for me because it describes as much as talent, how you are going to be inserting yourself into a team to be a better contributor to a project or to a very specific visual adventure, basically. But diplomacy doesn't go without talent, and talent doesn't go without diplomacy. It is a mix and a balance of both. Why? Because again, in a project, it's how much you can contribute from a talent perspective, but it's also how much you actually are able to listen and to insert yourself into that team. That balance between these two keywords is what, according to me, is just the best definition of what art direction is, but also a lot of different jobs. The talent side has to do with what art direction is, which what is your vision? What are you wanting to express? How do you understand, and how are you understanding enough the principles and the ideas that are connected to a specific franchise or to a specific IP? If you don't know your product, you're in trouble. But at the same time, you need to know your product, but you need to come up with a plan to be contributing to that product too. So in a way, if you don't have anything to give to a franchise, you can understand it very well. But if you're just sterile in what you can just give, it's just not going to be good. So what I mean is that you need to come up with a plan. You need to actually have a vision. And art direction is also obviously having at least some type of vision. It could be small, it could be big, it could be very determined, it can be very open on the contribution of other people that are going to just it's going to make your own art direction, because you always rely on artists as well as yourself to be able to shape up a project from a visual standpoint. But art direction is that. It's understanding your product, understanding what Halo is, for example, when it comes to Halo specifically. It has to do with, back many years ago, we were doing boot camps to better understand everything about what the franchise was, reading some of the books, being able to just like embed yourself into the universe of Halo. And all that stuff is kind of homework, but in a good way, because it's like more exciting than literally regular homework.
Yeah.
Basically, that's how I see the thing. But now when it comes to the talent side, this, again, if I go into the subfolder of what talent is, I consider that a good artist, a good contributor, and a good art director needs to be good everywhere. That's a bit of a given, but it's not easy, and you cannot always be good everywhere. But at least having a bit of a global understanding of art as a whole, which is understanding color, understanding perspective, understanding anatomy, understanding a lot of the principle and the visual principles that are going to be making an image really good. So the global knowledge is important, but you also need to be like the top notch somewhere. What I mean by this is that you need to be irreplaceable in at least one field. It's important from a career perspective because you want to be the go-to guy or the go-to person for at least one field and one expertise. Then after that, you can just be good everywhere if you can. Most people are not. I think I'm good in perspective, for example. I don't think I'm good in anatomy. If you ask me to literally sketch a muscle from all the arm and just like do a bit of an analysis of everything that goes into my arm, I'm very lousy on that. I will suck. I can do good silhouetting and all that stuff, but I don't know enough about anatomy. These are things I still need to learn because we need to all be in the mindset of just learning at any point in a career. But when it comes to perspective and architecture, that's a bit more of my forte. If you just like give me a sheet of paper, I'll be able to just like sketch like a full perspective out of nowhere, and people will say, "Are you just like using a grid and stuff for your perspective?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I've done so much perspective that it became kind of empirical, and I just do it automatically." So that's the thing about being very good somewhere, because you go into a bit of an irreplaceable status when you walk into a corporate universe. So basically, it assures you that your career can just move forward in a way. And after that, you have very different art directors. Out of respect of art directors that are just not extremely creative themselves, some of these art directors can have a very good eye when it comes to a lot of things, and they know how to convey art direction well. Personally, I prefer art directors that are actually on the battlefield. What I mean is that I prefer when an art director is a person that can also act on the visual side and paint themselves. Why? Because it's a way to be having people understand that you know even more what you're talking about. Hey, I have you in a way you can just be more convincing because you come up with a plan. You can even like pen it yourself and say, "This is what I was talking about." When you do everything via speech, it can be great. It can be really just done well, but it's true that there's just no better example than a tangible canvas example of what you want to be conveying. And so as a result, I always have an added respect for art directors that are literally out there and making the shit themselves at one point. And it's not about making everything. An art director needs to listen and needs to be able to convey art and emotion through visuals for a team and for a project. It's not about saying, let me just do everything myself. That's not how it works. But it's true that being able to participate to the production effort is, I think it's really important for an art director. That's a sure fact. But again, I don't want to be like excluding art directors that can just do things in a different way. I come from a concept art background, so it is an advantage for me to be able to just like convey what I want to be conveying through art, like through a canvas. I can do it. I can perfectly understand that you would have art directors that are coming from a CG and modeling background, and they're not going to be like literally popping up everything into Blender in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Even though we can see that more and more because Blender is just becoming very central into the act of being able to just like convey fast iterative things. And actually that's another subject, but that's when it comes to Blender, this is kind of like transforming a job and the industry right now when it comes to prototyping, concept art. Also, we are seeing a huge shift at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not talking about Blender in this interview, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's changing the game for concept artists. To iterate ideas and have a concept art in just 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, pluck out some stuff, paint over it, and bam, you have a concept art.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and about the art director, I was talking to Arjen Hambeck, the art director of Gears of War 5. Gears 5, yeah. So he said
Gears 5.
Let's change the name, yeah. And he said the way that he sees potential in someone that could potentially become a art director sometime in the future, or they handpick seniors, is that he said that there are two types of artists: those who put on a headphone and just start working on something, and those who keep asking you question about the history of this, about the new techniques. And he said that those are the people that they're going to be leaders, because they're curious, they're constantly asking questions, and they're expanding the vision of the game rather than just working on their assignment.
Definitely. I think that art direction, but also concept art, it's an open process. A lot of people through the years have always been, they always ask, I want to be a concept artist, but the way I want to do this is that I want to just do concept art and nothing else. And I'm like, wait a minute. Concept art is the consequence of who you are. It's basically everything you are. And if the only thing you are is concept art, we have a problem. If everything you are is travel, understanding specific sports, having like 5 disciplines that have nothing to do with concept art, but that are going to help you think outside the box, being a runner, being like a biker, like wanting to just fly a plane, being able to just like scuba dive, anything. But this is life. Concept art is a translation of life. So in a way, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just say, the only thing I want to do is be a concept artist and nothing else. Concept art is the consequence and the accumulation of everything that you are. And if you are not much, because the only thing you focus on is the discipline itself, we have a problem. The concept art is the consequence of who you are. It's just not an end. It is just the beginning, and it's just like, it's a way to represent the world. And if you don't know much about the world, you are again in trouble, basically.
Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, for artists, it's how do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
For artists, it's much more needed, to be a multi-dimensional human being in every aspect, because we do like 90% of what we do with our emotions, with our experiences, and maybe 10% of it is just technical. So yeah, I totally agree. It's a summary of our experiences through life. Yeah, that we put on the canvas.
I think you nailed it. The summary of our experiences. That's exactly that. This is what concept art is. It's a summary of who we are through time and through experiences. You should just not put things in reverse. Concept art is an end. It's like, it's truly, it's the stacking of everything you've done and all your knowledge. I'm always taking as an example, like, if you want to, you have a project where basically the project is, it's about Napoleonic Wars in 1810, for example. You want to know everything about the uniforms of the soldiers in 1810. You want to have a knowledge of that, and it's just not only of just like finding everything on Google. It's also understanding that time, the history, and betting yourself into why everything happened during that time. And it could just be any time of history, but it's like, it's understanding that, and understanding the timeline from a cultural, from every standpoint.
And if art is something very personal, and if it is something that comes out of research and experience, what if an artist is racing against the clock? What if there's crunch? What if you have to do something pretty fast and it requires a lot of emotion and a lot of kind of research? What do you do in that situation?
That's an interesting one. I don't think there's any magic wand secret spell that will remove crunch or remove like tough times when it comes to how we work in the industry. It's true that I've had a small period of crunch time, but I've been lucky most of the time, because it's true that the art direction curve is always slightly different compared to the real tangible production curve of a game. So as a result, I remember that on Assassin's Creed back in the days, we had small moments where we really needed to speed up. But when it comes to concept and when it comes to some of the visuals and the previs stuff, it's always just done in advance. So in a way, it's parallel to crunch time. The bummer is that crunch time really happens when it comes to the people that are making the tangible assets for the game. But when it comes to concept, that's a bit different. I don't think I have a recipe when it comes to avoiding crunch. I think we often hear through the years that crunch is the consequence of bad management and bad producing. I don't know if it's true or not. The problem is that I would also say that a game is the consequence of an insanely complicated recipe that sometimes works and sometimes does not. You can have genius people that are going to be on games that are failing because they have not been able to express a specific key gameplay feature that should have been there. So you cannot remove the roll of dice when it comes to working in AAA games, or even when it comes to indie games. It's as complicated in a way because you need to prove yourself in many different ways. I don't have any options to remove crunch. However, when it comes to concept and when it comes to having concept artists that are going to be very adapted to production, I spent a lot of my career being able to paint fast. And that is something that I'm very obsessed with. If you remember back between 2004 and 2008, basically, you had the full speed painting phenomenon in which I really heavily participated the whole thing. Speed painting at that time, and it became a bit of that negative term because speed painting is all about time now and it's not about content and about value. To be honest, I think that and that's a valid crit. It's a valid critic. A piece of art should just never be categorized or recognized because it just took 5 minutes instead of 35. That's not the point. Nonetheless, it's true that when it comes to a production process where everything needs to be done fast, I'm proud to say that we invented new techniques to just paint very fast and to be very adapted to production and to actually avoid some of that crunch stuff because, at least in concept, we were able to just shoot super fast and draw the gun super fast. I was obsessed by that, even when in the production of Halo 4, Halo 5. I think here's the thing. It just takes quite some time to be able to establish all the shortcuts, the visual shortcuts to be a faster artist. It's a consequence of years and years of being able to determine what stroke is important and what stroke you can just push away. It takes a lifetime, But at the end, it actually allows you to be also a better artist because look at the amount of portfolios of people that are literally stacking and stacking and stacking so much stuff through their imagery that their composition just suffers. At the end of the day, I like the clean, straightforward aspect of a very impulsive and emotion-oriented concept instead of really having a Leonardo da Vinci painting. I recognize the value of a Leonardo da Vinci painting, and I find it amazing. But in a way, it's not my job. My job is to be able to express an idea fast and having iterative ideas instantly to the service of a narrative intent. Basically, if a person says, I want to see a scene with a car, with 3 guys running, with an explosion, and with maybe a goddamn dragon or anything, I want to be able to say, here it is, after 30 minutes. What do you think of that? In a very type of key shot, keyframe type of way. I love that value. This is why I'm always having a bit of that motto phrase in my mind when it comes to the act of painting fast. It's all about the fact of being able to paint as you would write. When you write something, you have an expression through very mental abstractions because these are words. So there's a lot of mental shortcuts to express words. The table is written down. You see the table. So in a way, you imagine everything out of spoken words or out of the words themselves. How can you just have a bit of that instantaneous feel within a painting? So every time I look at concept art that is just like very impulsive and just like thrown out in a way that is just so genius, that's the thing that really talks to me. That doesn't mean that I don't like rendering. I love rendering, especially when it comes to being analytical on industrial design, when it comes to any vehicles, spaceship, cars, anything that just has wheels. Being able to know exactly what you're talking about and spending time, being able to just like draw the outline, being able to understand what's a good silhouette, what is a good flow within a vehicle, for example. But it's true that for me personally, I'm very much attracted to the idea of a fast process where after 5-6 hours, I would start to lose interest. And it's why when it comes to a painting, I would just like try to finish it in a day, maybe 2 days, but that's a max. If I go past this, it's a bit like if the cake is baked, like you have a recipe, you're not going to bring the cake that you've just done the day before, you're not going to get it out of the fridge and add an extra layer of cake on top to eat it again. If the cake is baked, the cake is baked. It is done. See what I mean? And I know it's weird. Some people are able to bring the cake back to life and add 15 layers to the cake. Personally, I don't know how they do that. When there's a psychological process, for example, when I paint, if I have 50 layers on my PSD, sometimes I get mentally, there's just too much traffic in my head because I'm always having the option to go deeper down into the layers. So what I do, I cut the crap straight away. I flatten and everything. I add a layer on top. I call my file a new name, and I said, now you can just walk. And I forget everything that I've had before. I do have alpha channels to actually have, my selections, but that's where it stops. I don't have anything else. And as a result, it allows me to force myself to make the right decision instead of like meddling into sub layers that will not help me finish my image. So what I do is that I flatten, I just add one layer and I'm like, there you go. Now you have one layer to just paint on top. Just go for it. And it always works because it allows me to free my head of all these layers that I know I'm never going to go back into, but that reassure me because I'm like, if I have the layer of the layers, I guess it's safe, right? But it's mentally not safe. You need to flatten your file and being able to start literally from one layer and just like literally paint. So, and I do that most of the time at around 70 to 80% of an image completion. That's where I will flatten everything all the time and start from scratch. And start from a flat layer. It allows me to free my mind,
Yeah, and I think it's easier for 2D artists. When it comes to 3D, I'm changing everything all the time. And a little from this camera, a little from that camera. No, this is better. No, that is better. And I think it gives us freedom in 3D, but man, it is demanding. To change everything all the time.
It comes and pros of digital art. The problem is that it will never force you. You're never forced to just like take bold decisions because you have the options to always go back and to change whatever you want to be changing, whatever the crap you want to be changing, and it's as much a huge advantage as it is a curse, because at one point,
exactly,
to become a better artist, you need to be able to commit yourself to a specific visual choice. And it's why I flatten, because this way it's like literally saying the door is shut behind me. There's nothing I can do than go forward, finish the goddamn image. You know what I mean? And every time I do that, it helped tremendously because my mind is free. These layers don't fucking exist anymore.
That's a great advice.
Yeah.
But an ex-girlfriend of mine, one day we went to a bookstore and she was a concept artist. She saw this art book by Pixar and she was going through it and she said, look how simple the ideas are in these concept arts. I take a lot of time kind of developing and putting time into creating something that I forget about the first idea that I had. And that's exactly true. That's something that I do in making music too. When the core idea comes, that emotion comes, and I try to lay it down as fast as I can, and then a day after, probably coming back and give it some new branches and new ideas to it. But the main idea should be there because it's coming from deep down and it's just there.
But we always say when it comes to a lot of intents in life and a lot of actions, your first thought is always the best one. And it's
exactly.
I think it's true in 90% of everything we do. It's true. Why? Because it's actually it's actually very brain oriented. Your first decision is always the best one because your subconscious and a lot of mechanisms in your brain have not had the time to pop up, to come up and being able to just like put yourself into a situation where you're going to be careful about these choices and adding a lot of parameters. Your first intent is always better because you are in a situation where you can just do a very fast decision without actually having all the brain clutter. Then after that, if I ask you a specific question on a subject and I give you 50 seconds, instead of giving you 5 seconds, in 5 seconds, your answer might just be more yourself than if I give you 50 seconds, because the 50 seconds is 5 seconds of impulse, but then it's like 45 seconds of, oh, wait a minute, overthinking, layers of safety in the way I'm going to be answering. Everything comes up into place because that's how the brain works. And the brain has so many safety nets that it's preventing a person to be expressing the first intention fast. And that's why I prefer spontaneity and the instant feature of going fast, specifically when it comes to art. Because again, in a way, it's like preventing the brain from stepping in and overthinking, in a way.
I mean, as artists, we're always, fighting our own brains, right? I mean, at some point, I'm just shut up, man. Let me just be done with this.
I'm going to tell you a funny thing, but it's true that's how I actually just work. When it comes to painting, I need to put myself in a pretty emotion-oriented state. It's actually very meditative, but it's a bit like trance-like. And so why I've always had some challenges through the years of being able to like literally paint in public, because I need to be in my brain, like literally in a bit of my own world. But the funny thing is, for years and years now, what I do is that I have my inner voice with which I interact all the time. And this is weird shit. I agree.
We all do it, man.
No, it's not weird. I have that too. I have that too.
And so in a way, I'm painting, but I chat to myself at the same time, and I ping myself like if there was a secondary character that can give me a second point of view on the things I do. And I'll be like, hey, wait a minute. That car is not the right one. Oh, you need to go back there. Oh my gosh, look at that storytelling. Look at that line. It's actually expressing something that you have not seen before. And all that stuff is from an inner voice. I bet that maybe that's why we all go cuckoo and all go crazy after 40 years, is that we talk to ourselves, and the artists are always the biggest weirdos, mostly because they learn to chat with an inner being that they invent to be better artists. So, which is amazing, but also pretty screwed up, I gotta say.
It takes a bit of crazy to be an artist. So
just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So what are some of your favorite video games regarding art direction, Nicolas?
So, I'm 50 years old, so people say, oh, wow, you don't look like you're 50. Good. I prefer that the opposite. Yeah. But basically, why am I saying this? It's because my first reference of video games is literally 1983.
Wow.
So 1983, you had a game called, it was done by Lord British, and it was Ultima 3.
Wow.
And Ultima 3 was a phenomenal game. Why? Because in 1983, I was living in Singapore, my dad comes back one day and he had just bought an IBM PC, the very first IBM PC. So imagine like a screen that is kind of really very spherical now, and at the bottom you had like the UC unit, the central unit, and that unit has 2 floppy drives. There's no hard drives at all. So every time we needed to play a game, we needed to actually have a DOS disk, a 5.5-inch disk. You would insert the DOS, remove the DOS, put the game in, and then you could play. And obviously, there was nothing you could save unless you would save it on the disks themselves. And a disk was per side probably 250K. And no hard drives, nothing. So basically, we played Ultima 3 this way for like 3 months of our lives. And it was phenomenal. It was the best souvenirs ever. Why am I saying Ultima 3? It's also because I have a bit of a nostalgia of early games compared to new games. And I love new games, and I can tell you more about other games I really like. But it's true that when it comes to the early games from the 1980s, even when it comes to text-based games, you were putting your brain to a pretty high contribution. You were asking your brain to fill all the gaps and to be very imaginative when it comes to these games. The only thing you had in Ultima 3 were tiny character icons and just like pixel art in a way, in the most basic way, and all that stuff with just 3 colors. And seeing that allowed you to have your imagination go apeshit on all that stuff because you had to create everything yourself. Another game was Elite back in 1984, 1985. And the spaceships in Elite, the first one, were literally wireframe and transparent. But who cared? The manual had like a cool, super small illustration of a spaceship in a very early homeworld style. And I was like, I would literally look at the manual, look at that spaceship, and for me, that's what it looked like in game. I was not caring because my brain was supplying all the visuals for these games. So what I mean is that I regret an era now where everything is just like literally crammed into you. You don't have anything to imagine. And I regret that because it's not very stimulating for the imagination. Now, it's good on a lot of other fronts. It's crazy immersive. It's hyper realistic. These are now simulation games because it is just so realistic. Whether you're in a first-person shooter or any type of platform or any RTS games, there's a lot of different advantages. But the problem is, it is just not simulating your imagination in the same way, and I regret that. I'm super happy because my 21-year-old loves video games. He's actually at DigiPen in Redmond here. He just graduated like a few days ago.
Wow,
and
congratulations.
He loves the first. Yeah, thanks. I'll tell him. And he loves the Zelda games. He goes back into early Zelda games, is passionate about it, learns about how it was done, looks at all the crazy Easter eggs from back in the days. And I love that because at least he understands that everything was coming from that historical progression where it came from eras of visual optimization. And that's the other thing I regret when it comes to game nowadays is that when you look at people in their 20s now, they suppose that it's a given that they can use the biggest amount of polygons ever. So it is not allowing them to optimize their assets. And I sort of regret that. It's one of the things where we always have trouble to have people understand is that an optimized asset is the best asset because it allows you to actually be analytical on that asset and make like some visual choices that are going to be counting. The biggest danger nowadays is the fact that there's no more limitations to anything you can do into any type of modeler and software. And I sort of regret that because technical, but mostly art limitation and visual limitations is the best creative tool to be able to transcend your art and do a better job at your work.
Yeah.
So now oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I remember this interview for Halo back in Bungie days, and I don't remember exactly who said this at Bungie, but it was from one of their level designers that's saying that in Halo, they are trying to always leave some places blank for the imagination of the players to not fully create the world. So there are some empty spaces or some places that requires your imagination to fill in the gaps, and that is why the world of it is kind of believable. That's something I've seen 343 Halos 2, especially in Infinite. There are places, given the fact that it's an open world game, there are places like, oh, I have some ideas about this place that I'm sure it's just my idea about it, but for everyone it's unique.
Yeah, because many parts of the new ring that they have has untold stories that we may see in their stories in the future, but most of it, it's just blank for our imagination.
I think that you're totally right. What I really like is the fact that you can just leave not only blank areas but also kind of mystical areas that are going to be acting differently within the realm in a way, within that world. For example, on Halo 4, there was a full 5 to 8 minutes of a fauna structure in the middle. I forgot about the exact name of that sequence, but there's no combat at all. There's basically, you don't need to draw your weapon, or if we could just have the weapon down, it would even be more fun, because you would just be looking at everything around you, drawing your gun down, and just being able to just admire the view. Back in 1997, I remember the first Ghost in the Shell animation. There's in the middle of that anime, in the middle you have like 5-6 minutes where there's a very slow music, and basically they present to you the full city in a very nostalgic way, and there's nothing happening except that they present you the city the way it is, exactly like what Blade Runner could do in 1982 by Ridley Scott. And these mystical moments is super vital, because there's nothing more important than the shooting sequences in a first-person shooter when you counterbalance that with areas of rest. When everything is about shooting all the time, you get like so bored, because it's exhausting mentally speaking. The rhythm and the pace of being able to just like stop shooting and admire is something that I think we should do more. The problem is that it's not always easy to just like bargain these types of moments when it comes to game designers that are here to make you have a fun shooting experience, which is understandable, So at the same time, it's a trade-off, and there's always discussions about, hey, that area, try to just make it a bit more mystical and just not like like a crazy shooting gallery, because we need some of these moments of rest,
Yeah. So
and when we have a balance between those two, it becomes a masterpiece like Infinite.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this is it. Thank you so much, Nicolas. Your work is always inspiring, and it gives birth to our imagination. Thank you for taking care of the franchise we all love. Halo is truly beautiful, and your work is a huge contributor to it. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.
That's kind of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for receiving me, and thanks for the chat. Again, expressing all that stuff is always, it just comes from the heart. So I'm happy to just like just reveal all that stuff to people that are interested, and thanks for having me mostly.
Yeah, the purpose of this whole podcast is to just educate and inspire younger people. I'm not an artist. I'm inspired by this conversation, so I'm sure they're gonna learn a lot from this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Guys.
All right, guys. Thank you all, and have a great day.